policies around like, hey, this is how much sugar is, or this fake chemical is in it that isn't good. Like people should know about that. If things are objectively causing cancer, no, that's not. I think there has to be common sense boundaries for consumer choice, and that is a role that I think a larger body could be, like the FDA, could potentially be more effective in than determining like what kind of policies on the ground, what should people in LA be eating versus what should people in Chicago be eating.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on another fun-filled episode. Yes, on the Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host. Joining us our lovely Cardio Miracle Studio here in sunny Pittsburgh, Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by our phenomenal sponsors, Amp America. Folks, get the news you need to know without the corporate media bias or fluff. Head to ampamerica.com. Also, the Brian Nichols Show powered by our phenomenal studio sponsor, Cardio Miracle. So, folks, if you're looking for, yes, the best heart health supplement in the world that will lower your blood pressure, lower that resting heart rate while also improving your pump in the gym, go ahead and stick around. We're going to talk about that later in today's episode. But first, and by the way, you don't need to adjust your podcast audio feeds or your video feeds. I was blown away at first, too. I thought I was having an interview with myself until I realized that our last names are a little different. Joining us here on the Brian Nichols Show from Young Voices is Brian Nuckols. Brian, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Hey, it's great to be here, Brian. We'll try to manage my confusion as well. I think we'll make it, though.
I've been managing my confusion for at least 5 years now. My wife still gives me grief for it. But I had particular confusion when I saw your name pop in the calendar. I said, is this me? And then I see you join the feed. We both got the facial hair, the backwards hat. I'm thinking, okay, so this Brian is my Brian brother from another mother. But hey, for today, we're going to make this the Brian Nichols Knuckles Show, and we're going to be talking all things FDA, talking about harm reduction, all that fun stuff and more. But Brian, before we jump into today's topic of conversation, do us a favor, introduce yourself, yes, Brian Nuckols, to the Brian Nichols Show audience. And why is it that you're focused so much in the world of health policy before we jump in today?
Yeah, first of all, it's an honor to be here, Brian. I love the show and long-time listener, first-time caller. And I'm Brian Nuckols. I'm a psychotherapist and transitioned into journalism to explore how our society and how we're structuring our society and the kind of philosophical choices we're making from a political theory perspective impact health. So I've worked in the field of addiction for a long time. So I have a particular fascination and interest in how our political choices impact our health decisions and vice versa. That's what led to this piece.
Yeah, well, then let's talk about that. Let's jump right in, right? Because this has absolutely been a topic that has been leading the headlines both, in more recent months with RFK Jr. taking over the role as head of HHS there. We've been seeing this throughout the campaign during 2024, the coalition between Make America Great Again and Make America Healthy Again, the MAHA movement. And here on the show, we've had dozens of folks on the program in more recent months talking about the health, the wellness, the stuff we're putting into our bodies, the lack of good things we're putting into our bodies, and all that in between. And one of the reoccurring themes I've been hearing here, Brian, on the show has been there's a big push from folks, and I would just say we're going to classify this as the MAHA movement just for the sake of conversation today. Sure. It has not so much been a let's go and ban certain things, but rather let's just make sure we have informed consent, right? Like if I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to go buy Fruit Loops for my kid, I should, as a consumer, at least feel I have been given enough information to make an educated decision. And with that being said, if I have these government organizations and entities that are in their federal bureaucracies supposed to be keeping us safe, very loose air quotes there for the audio listener, and I see a certain ingredient or whatever it may be, it's been given the green light, right? This doesn't cause human harm when you consume it. Little asterisk there, right? Like this is where the real debate has been. Now, you wrote an article that focuses specifically on the FDA's proposed menthol ban, which now looks like it's going into the trash can. But this overarching ethic, right? It really does permeate into all the different conversations around public health. So I've set the stage here, right? This is where that health conversation really has turned into over the past few years, into the past few months. And now, Brian, what we're seeing is a very different approach to, in this case, the FDA, the HHS, the CDC, and being, I hope, more transparent with the American public. So there's me setting the stage. Where did I miss some stuff? And let's maybe turn this into a conversation specifically that your article touches on, and that it was that proposed menthol cigarette ban and where that ended up today.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I love how you're, Brian, bringing up transparency and health. This is a really interesting angle. I did touch a little bit on transparency, but where my argument, the main thrust of my argument was based on choice. So agency choice-based public health strategy is the term I use in the article. And this, I think dovetails really nicely with your ideas about transparency, because to make informed choices, we need truth or at least some transparency. So I think those two play really, really nicely together. And I think there is one reason I'm excited to be on the program, because you dive into some of the more philosophical questions. I think there is something deeply philosophical about the nature of humans and self-determination. Like, what is the best way? Are human beings listening to their body and saying, like, do I want this cigarette? Do I want this Fruit Loops? Or do I want something else? Is that what we trust? Or do we trust a more top-down bureaucratic solution that gives us firm boundaries on what we're allowed to choose? I think that's a pretty deep question about the human nature that we can dig into. But I make a bet in my piece on betting on human agency, and that, if we smoke cigarettes, there might be health consequences, but there'll be unintended, oftentimes worse consequences when we bring large bureaucracies in.
Like what, by the way? And because this argument right here is where I hear a lot of folks kind of like they just stop paying attention. They're like, oh, like what? There's something worse than smoking cigarettes? Mm-hmm. And the answer is yes, right? Like the answer is a quite obvious yes, but that's maybe a little self-apparent to myself and a lot of the more libertarian folks who are on the show, or at least in the audience, right? So for the folks out there who are saying, well, Brian, help me out here. Like, show me where we're seeing more negative impacts from these different, drugs or not so great things that we're putting into our body, actually causing more harm than the very substances themselves.
Absolutely. So I think as I dive into that, there's kind of two lenses that our conversation and the article has to dance between: the proscriptive, or what should be, and the descriptive, and what is. Mm-hmm. And so descriptively, something I accept is that people smoke cigarettes. Yep. And this is, something that happens. And we could say it's bad for you, I don't want my family smoking, whatever, but there's a descriptive lens. And then we can be like, take a proscriptive lens and say, hey, we want a healthier society. And how can we achieve that together? How can we organize together to have a more healthy family, community, society? And I think the question about what's worse is in that domain. Like, what, and there's a lot of evidence in the public health literature. So this has been tried in Massachusetts, New York, California. In both Massachusetts and California, the bills explicitly were targeted at African-American populations in a way to, decrease smoking among black people. Essentially, it was the stated intention of these bills, and it increased in both cases. Black people smoked more because the illicit market grew. It became a status symbol. People smuggled it, and it was cheaper actually than it was before. So from a pragmatic standpoint, bans often lead to, unintended consequences. Like, we didn't suspect that a large illicit market would develop. We didn't suspect that they become like cultural symbols and a form of resistance against the government. And this is what happened. And so we see the pragmatic argument I make is sociology, public health is a complex system, and bureaucratic bans aren't an effective top-down national and state level bans, are just a bad tool for public health.
So what's the line, right? And here's the context of my question, right? My wife, she worked in public health for a number of years, and I saw this, firsthand in the conversations I had with her. I was talking about the idea that, hey, if you're getting SNAP benefits, which for those playing along in the home game, that's what we used to call food stamps, right? And they reframed it just so it didn't sound as bad. So SNAP benefits, you're getting SNAP benefits, and there was a proposal here during the coming on of the Trump administration, saying, hey, if you're getting SNAP benefits, at the very least, we're going to say maybe you shouldn't be able to use those for garbage, right? Like candy and soda and junk food. And for me, as more or less a utilitarian libertarian, I guess, like that makes sense. If you're going to be getting my government dollars via my taxpayer dollars being funneled through, name your bureaucracy here, saying, here you go, a person who is disadvantaged, here is a pile of money that you can now use to go and purchase your food for the week. You shouldn't be able to use that for not so great things, right? And I would say, as again, in more that utilitarian mindset, that makes sense. But then I'd have that conversation with my wife, and she goes, well, what about when you have food deserts, right? And we lived in Philadelphia for 7 years. What if you have food deserts and there's folks who literally have no access to a fresh produce grocery store, and the closest thing they have is a bodega on the corner, right? Like you're in Philadelphia, that's all you see when you go into more of like the quote unquote ghetto areas, which by the way, where I lived for a number of years, is you only see those little corner stores, those little bodegas, which by the way, are just chock full of processed garbage. So I see both sides of the argument. And personally, because I have my own biases, but also seeing my wife working in this world. So,
hey folks, I want to take a moment to talk about something that has truly changed my life, and that is Cardio Miracle, our incredible studio sponsor. Now, I'll be honest, when I first heard about Cardio Miracle and their claims about improving heart health, I was skeptical. But after using it for just about 2 months, I was absolutely blown away by the results. First, my blood pressure went from being consistently around 140/90 to a much more healthier and manageable 120/80. And my resting heart rate dropped from the low 70s to the high 50s. And I couldn't believe it. But the benefits didn't stop there. I started sleeping better, and I felt more energized at the gym, and my heart felt the best it's felt in years. And it's not just me. Hundreds of you, our amazing listeners, have reached out to share your own incredible experiences with Cardio Miracle. So, what is Cardio Miracle, and how does it work? It's a carefully crafted supplement that harnesses the power of nitric oxide to support optimal heart function. So, by increasing nitric oxide levels in your blood, Cardio Miracle helps relax your blood vessels, improve circulation, and it protects your heart from damage. It's like giving your heart the support it needs to function at its best. And here's the best part. We've got an exclusive offer just for you, our loyal listeners here at the Brian Nichols Show. When you head over to cardiomiracle.com and use code TBNS at checkout, you'll get an extra 15% discount on your order. Plus, with their 100% money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So, if you're ready to take control of your heart health and experience the life-changing benefits of Cardio Miracle for yourself, just click the link in the show notes or video description. Trust me, your heart will thank you. And don't wait another day to prioritize your health. Join the tens of thousands of folks who have already discovered the Cardio Miracle difference. Head to cardiomiracle.com now and use code TBNS for 15% off your order. Your journey to a happier and healthier heart starts today. And now, let's get back to the show.
Brian, when we're looking at this kind of balance between what you should do versus what you shouldn't do, and then you start to add in all those little variables, right? Are they getting taxpayer dollars? Are the actual foods that we're talking about, are they getting subsidized? Like all this kind of stuff, right? And then layering in the topic of conversation I started with, saying, and then you have all these bureaucracies who are saying, and by the way, even if this stuff maybe isn't the best for us, we'll let it slide. We'll say it's fine. Like that seems like there's a lot of variables coming into this very complex and sometimes difficult to have conversation. So help me unwind this, Brian. Let's talk about the different aspects, right? The different variables I outlined here, both in terms of utilitarian mindset, the access standpoint, and then also just, hey, if it's being told it's good for you, shouldn't those different bureaucracies at the very least have different standards that they're promoting to the public and consider what is safe?
Yeah, I think that last point, having different standards, I think one of the principles I'm going to suggest and what I suggest in the article is more decentralization, more localization in standards. A federal or state level, they can't plan for the contingencies that you're talking about. So the answer to your question is kind of a both and. It's like if you're in a certain area where you can incentivize healthier choices. Maybe as a community, people are going to come together and make that decision to means test. But then if you're doing it in Philadelphia, Detroit, Baltimore, this could lead to like starvation or something. I don't know. I don't want to be hyperbolic, but it could be a really bad decision. And so what food stamps in certain neighborhoods in Los Angeles are going to look different than other neighborhoods in Los Angeles. Maybe we could just stay there. And so I think having more decentralization, if this is what I would suggest to the new administration in Washington, is if we're going to centralize money and take money for people, we should be funneling that into community-based stakeholders that can use the wisdom of the streets to inform the decisions and not make them be burdened by regulatory frameworks that are just so overly specific or overly broad and unhelpful. Because you can't really plan. No, myself or any bureaucrat can't plan for the contingencies that are going to, we live in a large country from Idaho to Kentucky to California to New York. People are going to have to make different decisions on how they help give people a leg up. So
let me play devil's advocate, and not so much because I want to, but because this is the question I know we're going to get asked.
Okay.
But Brian, there are just black and white things that are not good for people, right? Mm-hmm. Or let's say detrimental to society. And this is not an overtly health-focused topic here, but like this was a conversation I was having back during the election, which was the whole idea of like drag queen story hours for kids, right? Mm-hmm. And I 1000% agree with you. Like at the very least, that should not be a federal edict saying, hey, no more drag queen story hours. But at the very least, if you're in a locality and that locality is like, hey, we've agreed as a local government that's a no-go, right? Or at the very least, not in our public institutions that taxpayers are paying for, right? So in that spirit, there are absolutely things, to your point earlier, and we mentioned, the unintended consequences, but there are things that are objectively bad for folks, right? Mm-hmm. And that could be across the board. You could talk about alcohol. You could talk about smoking. You could talk about like the crap that we're putting into our bodies from a food perspective, or is it food, right? Oh, that's the question. Mm-hmm. And you see that there are objective realities, but to your point, there is, on the flip side, there is the human behavior side of things that we really can't control, which is by design, right? We're not supposed to be able to control every facet of people's lives. But I guess it does come back to the question, if there are things that are overtly harmful towards people, and this is the golden part of the question, right? And then if we are, as a tax-paying base, expected to cover the costs of the healthcare, right? Or to cover the cost of name the consequences therein of allowing this harmful behavior or this harmful substance or this harmful food to go into our food ecosystem, I guess, or our public health ecosystem, is there not at the very least an argument to say, well, should we at the very least say that these regulatory agencies, even if they're not saying, hey, we're just going to allow it, be truthful in saying that these aren't good for you, so we do it, at the very least, have a more informed public when they go out and make these purchases? Yeah,
it's a great question, I think. And this, again, we're bouncing between the descriptive and the
right. I know, yeah.
Yeah, and
by the way, the reason I'm doing this is because this is how the average person kind of approaches these issues.
Oh, definitely, right? Definitely. Yeah. No, these are questions that need to be answered in this debate. Absolutely. I think from an enforcement perspective, my perspective, we could use examples of like sex work and drugs. When I think as things that I think like certain drugs and certain practices are going to be bad for society generally and icky and bad, go after the bigger fish. That's what I think enforcement should do. I think from a smaller local level, more of a focus on punitive measures objectively haven't been shown to be effective. Mm-hmm. But if these things are if someone's pouring poison into the river, like we should stop them from doing that. And that's like, yeah. There's like a more utilitarian argument there. It's like, okay,
I'm in poli-sci class talking about John Stuart Mill. You can swing your fist up to the bridge of my nose. Like, exactly. I just feel like that's the conversation. Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. And so, I would say from an enforcement perspective, like look at policies around like, hey, this is how much sugar is, or this fake chemical is in it that isn't good. Like people should know about that. If things are objectively causing cancer. No, that's not. I think there has to be common sense boundaries for consumer choice. And that is a role that I think a larger body could be, like the FDA, could potentially be more effective in than determining like what kind of policies on the ground, what should people in LA be eating versus what should people in Chicago be eating.
Well, and by the way, I'm so glad you mentioned LA just there, because this is also where I think there will be a debate. And that is, well, who do I believe? Do I believe these federal officials, or do I believe my local officials? And we see this because I remember, I know all of us have experienced this, right? You go and buy name product here, and almost guaranteed on the label somewhere is this ingredient has been found to cause cancer in the state of California, right? And it almost became like a joke line at one point, because it's like, oh, what doesn't cause cancer if it goes to California? But is California on the right track in saying, hey, listen, there's a lot of this stuff that we say is good, or not the very least, let me rephrase that, not necessarily good, we're just minimizing the bad, right? Or we're not even talking about the bad. Like, then you have some yin and yang, right? I have California saying one thing and I had the federal government saying the other. Is that a step in the right direction?
It's a good question. I have to admit, I find the California labeling stuff to be a bit virtue signally. Like, I don't think, like, I find it to be not that helpful at that point if everything has it. I think this is...
If everything causes cancer, nothing does. Yeah.
And it's like, at what threshold, if it's 1 in a million people, maybe I wouldn't want to play Russian roulette with that, but at a certain level, it's not helpful information. And I think this is one reason why we're seeing things like Maha, and that can be mixed up with things that kind of seem a little absurd sometimes, because there's such a credibility crisis in these organizations. I mean, I remember, the one specter that's haunting us as we talk about this is the COVID pandemic.
Oh yeah. Right.
This is a crisis point for legitimacy in public health, for a number of reasons: bad messaging, misinformation, all kinds of different things, and overly aggressive policies forcing people to do things they don't want to do. All kinds of issues with it. Another piece I wrote that's adjacent to the FDA is about being our own fact checker. Like not relying on big tech to label everything for us, and actually developing cognitive tools to be able to make sense of the world. And I think risk analysis, we can't trust any officials to give us an accurate risk analysis. 1, because their incentives are misaligned with ours, and 2, they don't know our lives. Like, for some people, smoking a cigarette is worth it. Yep. A 22-year-old, at a party might be worth it. 56-year-old with grandkids and cancer, that's a bad risk assessment. So it's our own risk assessment. And so when I look at, does this Advil, I have a headache and this Advil has a 1 in 100,000 chance of giving me a stroke, I'm going to take the Advil. And I think we need to learn to make those kind of decisions, and not rely on institutions that have misaligned incentives to do it for us, because they're not going to.
So this is where the real battle takes place now, right? Because you and we can have this conversation on the show, and yet when we bring this to your average public, they're like, dude, I don't have the time. I'm not going to sit there and go through every single ingredient and start to look up every single ingredient to make sure I'm not eating literal poison, or I'm not giving my kids literal poison. And by the way, in my abdication of that responsibility, I'm going to look towards the experts, which, as you mentioned back during COVID, the entire idea of expertise in public health was just completely thrown with egg on its face, right? So all of a sudden you're saying, I'm going to defer to the experts. And then a lot of folks say, oh shit, which experts, right? Am I going to trust the folks who my tax dollars are going and paying for at these different bureaucratic institutions, the EPA, the FDA, the CDC, the HHS? Or am I going to trust other folks? Like I just heard, I forget the guy's name who was on Patrick Bet-David's show, but there's a health guy, and then there's I think it's Paul Saladino and stuff like that. Like there are other experts, Jillian Michaels, who are out there, and they are obviously health experts by the nature of their, number one, their outcomes, right? They help get people healthy.
Sure.
Like Jillian Michaels was a Taibo, like that old workout routine when you put the DVD in and you'd go kick in the air for 3 hours. Like she was and is a health icon. Like Tony Horton from Beachbody, like he's a health icon. Shaun T, like all these folks out there, both from the fitness side and the health side, like the nutrition side, they've built up their careers by being right? Like more often than not, at the very least, because they're obviously answering a question or presenting a solution to a very real problem we see. I think that problem is a lack of trust. So I say all that to the average person who's looking at this, like, all this information. I'm being told red dye 40 is bad, yellow 6 is bad, red 3 is bad. Like seed oils are causing cancer, like glyphosates on all of our food, folic acid's going to, cause all these issues. YouTube, don't ban me. That's the arguments, right? But like you hear all this, and as a consumer, I say, I don't know what to do, Brian. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know who to trust. I don't know who to ask questions about. To that person, what do we say to them?
It's a great question. I've kind of there's a political advocacy component and then a very practical component to this. And so I'll start with the practical and then get into the political advocacy. So the practical one is, I think, to this misaligned incentive idea, I think there's like the 80-20 principle, which is really helpful. Like a lot of people in the health sphere are, they have an incentive to be the expert and sell something. That's just what, I'm not demonizing that. I'm just saying that's their incentives. But for us, like our incentive is to just generally be healthy. And I think like, it's not that hard, some vegetables, some water, the very basics, what our grandparents were, in their best eating, like don't just do the basics. And for most of us, that's going to be fine, and, find some credibility marker, like you're talking about, someone who's been around for a while, who looks good, who, has access to some kind of decent food that you can find. And I know that can be a privilege for some people, but you can probably find some organic, good food somewhere and invest in it because it's important. So that's one. And then, from a political advocacy perspective, it makes sense. People have busy lives. They want different they want to pay for experts to tell them what to do so they don't have to. And I think this is a huge problem with health in the US. Is like, so I come from a psychotherapy background. We need more experimentation, more innovation in health, so people can try things and see if it works. And a lot of our veto-ocracy stops innovation in health in particular. Like we need to have, it's squirrely for people because unlike technology, which is inorganic, innovating with the psyche and it feels so human, but that's how humanity grows, through trial and error. And I know that's for people on the more liberty side, that's one messaging thing we struggle with, is for us to grow, there has to be failure. And, if you look in my field, unfortunately, sadly, and it's tragic, most of the innovations in neuroscience and psychology came from catastrophic injuries and wars, because we learned through immense damage, how things work. And we need to control that failure process and make it as safe as possible, but also as real as possible, so that we can see like, this practice for depression seemed like a good idea, didn't do shit, didn't help us. Sorry, I didn't mean to curse.
Wait, are you saying that the frontal lobotomies didn't work out as intended?
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's kind of my advocating for decentralization, innovative solutions to health, taking the brakes off of that is huge. Is absolutely huge. And then we will have more experts we can trust, and more approaches that we can. One thing, a bottleneck, is we have biochemical individuality, which I know is a big mouthful, but people are different. So these,
what?
Yeah, these standardized.
People aren't all the same. We're not cookie cutters. Say it ain't so.
Yeah. So these standardized solutions, it's just doomed. Even though it would be nice, it's not reality.
Amen. Well, and by the way, let's go back to the reason you're here today, which is talking about your amazing article written over at our good friend Matt Kibbe's org, Free the People. Please go ahead and give Matt some love. Matt is one of the best out there, and he's helping teach folks how to sell liberty by having some awesome conversations. So go check out Kibbe on Liberty over there, part of the Blaze Network. But with that being said, yes, going back to your article, the FDA kills menthol ban, a triumph for harm reduction over at Free the People. So, Brian, give us the Spark Notes version about this article, and what does this look like in terms of talking about cigarettes, menthol, and all that kind of stuff? I don't smoke, so I'm talking quite ignorantly about the topic. So, fill us in.
Yeah, so it gives a timeline of the proposal, which started in the Biden administration, a kind of view of the why of menthol ban. So they're flavored cigarettes. So the public health people, they don't like it because it younger people, it tastes better. So it can sometimes it's seen as like a gateway to smoking because it's a bit softer on the lungs. And so I give that view, and then in the timeline of the ban, it got a lot of pushback. And then I look at the evidence, like in the more descriptive level where this has been tried, its stated intentions, point out how it's failed and created unintended consequences, and then make an argument for choice-based strategies, kind of like what we were talking about, more innovation. People want to smoke. Can we make, instead of saying all smoking is bad, can we make this healthier? Can we give alternatives that aren't as addictive? Can we experiment with different choice-based strategies? That's kind
Can
of
I play devil's advocate for like 10 seconds?
Yeah.
Because wouldn't the average person say, but Bri, vaping, like that's a thing, and that is safer? Or the little pouches. What are those things called? Like the nicotine pouches, the Zyn pouches and stuff, right? Like those are a thing. So hey, there's an alternative in the market, right? Like, couldn't that be an argument against the repealing of the menthol ban?
So, like, the argument is like they have these alternatives already. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like if we're saying that we want to be able to start focusing on creating better alternatives, well, hey, here we go. Here's some options.
Yeah. I mean, I think I personally, I wouldn't want to ban those either. And I think if the folks in the FDA had a pen, everything would be banned. So, I mean, I think that the kind of argument I'm making is have everything on the shelf, allow people to experiment.
Yep.
And as the money goes into a particular market, people generally want to be healthy. There's an aspect of, I want to be healthy. I want healthier solutions. There's a market for it. And we need to unleash entrepreneurs and people in these spaces, except that it's going to be hard to stop people from smoking and kind of allow this sphere to exist and allow people to innovate in it. And I kind of am making a bet on ingenuity and human agency here. And yeah, it's definitely a huge argument. And if you're watching this and want to debate, hit me up. I definitely like doing it on Twitter. There's a lot to talk about.
Well, and let's let's maybe a quick little segue. I know we're getting hard pressed for time here, but I do have a follow-up question because I ruffled some feathers on social media this weekend when I posted about social stigma being a good thing, actually. And folks were like, "Oh, this is such a backwards mentality." And I was like, "Okay, hold up. I am not arguing in favor of government banning certain things. I'm not arguing in favor of like government saying, certain speech or certain products should or should not be allowed. What I'm saying is that it used to be back in the day, folks, to your point, would say, maybe you shouldn't do that, right? Like maybe you shouldn't go out and just binge drink every single day, or maybe you shouldn't, force food down your face, to the extent that you're morbidly obese, right? Like, and there was a social stigma to help hold people socially into check, like to make sure that you're kind of stepping to the right beat, right? Like you're staying in line. And that's not to say that like that was always a good thing. And I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that was at the very least, that's not a phrase I use a lot, at the very least. But like it is at the very least something that it helps curate behavior in a way outside of leveraging government force, right? Like, isn't that a good, like, isn't social stigma actually a good thing in that regards?
Yeah, I know it's not the sexiest, nicest topic, but I'm also pro stigma, pro guilt, pro shame on a certain level. Even though in our kind of culture of narcissism, these aren't popular things. I stopped smoking because someone said, "I'm not going to kiss you if you continue to smoke." I think that is more effective than a government ban. And I think that in the similar way that we should have choice, we could have another episode on this. having choice-based strategies is good. I think that's why freedom of speech and expression is important.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like when people smoke. It makes my nose hurt. Like, that is better feedback for me than a distant, far-off bureaucrat wagging their finger at me and saying, I think this is bad, especially when I don't trust them, when they don't have any integrity. So I think, knowing who you want to take feedback from is important, but having feedback, I think, is important. And that's one danger of things going on in our culture that is shutting people up. It's a big problem because we don't get accurate feedback. And it makes us more reliant on these really ineffective institutions. So I'll have to check out that tweet. I'll have to go engage with it. Sounds provocative.
Oh yeah, I got a lot of people yelling at me. That's not libertarian. I'm like, actually, I think it's very libertarian, but I digress. So Brian, we're going towards the tail end of the episode here. As you know, we do a little segment called Final Thoughts. So I'm going to go ahead, start things off, and I'll kick things over to you to bring us home. But I just want to call something out. And this isn't really, I mean, this is like same church, different pew from our conversation today. But the overarching theme of what I'm going to wrap up here with is that things change. And look no further than right now, Gen Z. If you go to a concert, right? Like I'm the old fuddy-duddy when I go to concerts now, Bri. My wife and I went to go see Post Malone, and I'm like, hello, fellow kids. And it's, the average age of the concert goer is probably like 18, 19, 20 years old. But there's obviously a lot of folks there who are of drinking age, right? And yet when I looked around at the crowd, you know what I saw most folks holding in their hand, Bri? It was the Liquid Death, right? And for the folks who aren't aware, Liquid Death is a can of water. That's all it is. It looks like you're drinking a beer. It's a tall boy looking can, but it's just water. That's all it is, right? And if you look around at this concert, there is literally hundreds, thousands of young folk who are saying, yeah, no, I don't want alcohol, right? And you look at alcohol sales, they have plummeted over the past 5 years, by and large, due to the fact that Gen Z isn't really drinking anymore. And like that just speaks to, I think, my generation. And I say my generation as though I'm some old fuddy-duddy, but like, I was in college about 10 plus years ago, and that was the norm. Like drinking, binge drinking, like parties and stuff, like that's just what people did. And to see now that has really, I mean, it's not gone away, but it's definitely scaled back, especially for that younger generation. So the fact that we're seeing as more and more of the younger generation has access to more information. I mean, the internet, we really got to take a step back. The internet didn't exist in its form that we have today until the 2000s, right? So this is 30 years ballpark of information being readily available to a large public, that before it was never really even a topic. Like you got your news from the paper or from college or from school or from the encyclopedia, or you watched the evening news. Like you didn't go online and do your own research. And that's just such a new thing that's new. I say new for like Gen X. It's newer for millennials. It's alien to the boomers of the world. But for Gen Z, Gen Alpha, this is just that is what it is. That's status quo. That's normal to them, right? Like, oh man, I forget which episode it was we did back last year or 2 years ago. When you do like 950 plus episodes, you kind of, they blend a little bit. But like there was one episode we were talking about how each generation kind of has a new starting off point, right? And they're carrying forward from the last generation of what was considered the status quo. And to see where Gen Z and Gen Alpha are today as their status quo, right? Like the world of the cell phone, the world of the internet, like that is now the starting off point. God forbid, unless the expression, I know that World War II was fought with, nukes and planes, but World War III will be fought with sticks and stones, right? I pray that never becomes real life. But let's just say we're continuing with the setting off point that, hey, when you have your supercomputer phone, or you have access to this massive thing called the internet, which is a knowledge base for everything that's ever been promoted anywhere at any time, like, yeah, I feel that I can do some research and make a decision for myself way better relative to some random bureaucrat sitting in a nice cushy office in DC telling me that this is going to be bad for me because statistics or science and I know, oh man, that's gonna be clipped. Oh, look at Brian, doesn't like science. But like that is the thing right there, right? Is that the status quo has changed so much. Just to say, we're going to see that continue, right? Like, I would not be surprised as we go forward. Smoking is going to become more and more unpopular. Drinking is going to become more and more unpopular. By the way, like interestingly enough, there we go. You look at Gen Z right now, the rate of like one night stands has also plummeted. So you're seeing a social change there as well. So there's a lot to unpack, but the overarching theme is that yes, things change. So whatever is today is not necessarily going to be the thing tomorrow. And as a matter of fact, it might be on the way out before we even realize it. But that's my final thoughts, Brian. What do you have for us as we wrap things up here today? And of course, Brian, where can folks go ahead and follow Brian Nuckols, not Brian Nichols? Floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I think that is well said. There's an organic change happening, like the systems self-regulate. And a lot of times centralized planning interrupts that in a vain attempt to try to protect us from outcomes that are, happening and part of the learning process. And there's more skillful ways that we can act. And if we kind of face reality for what it is, that's what I leave people with. Thinking of what your trade-offs are, thinking of what your credibility signals are, and to how much are you willing to invest in self-reliance and in what subjects, and what kind of credibility markers are you going to invest in for the topics that you don't have that time or space to look at. So that's what I'll leave people with. And yeah, find me. I'd love to, one of my favorite podcasts. So I'd love to connect with the audience. I'm at Twitter, X/Twitter at Brian Nuckols, not Nichols, Nuckols 13. Find me. And I also talk about shame and social stigma, so you'll have to, sort out who you're talking to, but you can follow both me and Brian. And then Substack is, I have a project called Hesitation Media where we do slow journalism. We cover things from months and years ago with updated sources. We stay away from breaking news. I contribute at Young Voices. So I'd love to connect with the audience, and appreciate what you're doing, Brian. I'm really glad I was able to come on.
Likewise, Brian, likewise. And thank you for giving a shout out to, Young Voices. Young Voices is an amazing organization. I've been working with them now for 3-4 years. I was a mentor there for quite a bit for some of the up and coming young voicers. I worked with our good buddy, Caleb Franz, formerly of the Weird Libertarians Network, and still a phenomenal dude. I love him. He's a great human being. He has his brand new book out called The Conductor. Go ahead and check that out if you haven't had a chance yet. But no, Young Voices is doing amazing work, bringing some very bright minds together, both young and a little bit older. I'm not going to date you there, Brian, but you and I are definitely on the upper end of the young folk. Which, hey, you know what? I'll channel my inner Steve Buscemi. Hello, fellow kids. But no, Young Voices doing amazing work. And yeah, how about this? We'll make it easy for folks who are like, Brian Nichols, Brian Nuckols. This is confusing, guys. All links in the show notes. So if you want to go ahead, follow Brian or follow yours truly, you can find those links, down below. But just for the audio listener, just so you have a heads up, you can find yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. You can find me on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. And yes, the Brian Nichols Show is both a video version show as well as an audio version show. So you can go ahead to YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, Facebook, wherever it is you like to consume your video content. Just do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, and also head down below into the comments. We want to hear your thoughts. What are your reaction to both Brian and yours truly's positions here in the show today? Are you in favor of things being banned? Do you think we just need to have more informed consent? Go down below and duke it out. And then otherwise, you can go ahead and find the Brian Nichols Show, like I said, on your favorite podcasting platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music. I like Podcast Addict, wherever it may be. Just hit that subscribe button so you miss a single time we have a brand new episode hitting your podcast feeds. And one last note, please go ahead, support our amazing sponsors like Amp America, Cardio Miracle, all those links down below. But with that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Brian Nuckols. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.